Hi there. In this video, I'll be going over two essential terms that are key components to understanding proper program design and program development. For a beginner, when you are new to strength training and new to strenuous physical activity, it seems as though you get better every time you go to the gym. You get stronger, you get leaner, you get faster, you have more endurance. But as you get closer to your physical genetic potential, this progress slows. Now, if you would try to break personal records every time you go to the gym, you will inevitably end up overtraining or injuring yourself. This is where program design and periodization becomes an important component in your strength training. Periodization is a system comprised of less intense phases and more intense phases. This allows your body to recover from certain extreme bouts of exercise so that you never really go into the overtraining zone. In other words, you won't see progression every time you go to the gym and every time you work out. You won't be crushing personal records every time. There will be weeks where you are not pushing your limitations and other weeks where you will be pushing your limitations, but in the long run, you'll be steadily advancing and increasing your physical capabilities. So let me reiterate, in a proper program, you don't have to see progression every time you go to the gym. The idea is that at the end of every cycle, you should see a progression. So if your cycle is 1 month long, you want to see some sort of progression at the end of the month. If your cycle is an 8-week cycle, a 12-week cycle, or even longer, you would want to see some sort of progression at the end of every cycle. But don't look for a progression every time you work out, because the whole idea of periodization is that sometimes you go less intense and sometimes you go more intense. This allows you to progress in the long run without injuring yourself and without overtraining. So now back to the two essential terms that need to be thoroughly understood to understand programming and understand periodization are 1, intensity, and 2, RPE, which stands for rated perceived exertion. Intensity is a factor of your 1 rep max. For example, if you can lift 100 pounds over your head one time, training at an intensity of 60% means that you'll be using 60 pounds. If you can deadlift 400 pounds, respectively 60% will be 240 pounds. Now, rated perceived exertion is a little more tricky since it's perceived exertion, which means it's not an exact calculation. There are many charts available for you on Google to understand how you would rate different exercises, but I will briefly go over numbers 5 to 10 since they are most relevant to strength training. Training at a rated perceived exertion of 5 is not strenuous at all. It is very unlikely that you will break a sweat, you will probably not get a muscle pump, and you won't feel like you've killed a workout when you're done. An example of this is if you can lift 100 pounds over your head 10 times, doing it 3 or 4 times will probably be a 5. It will not be very difficult at all. 6 is very similar to 5, and in many charts you will actually see 5 and 6 combined together. 6 is just a tad more difficult. You might break a sweat, you might get a very slight pump, but you are still leaving plenty of gas in the tank. 7 and 8 are very often interchangeable, and you will also see them very commonly put together in a chart because it's really hard to differentiate between them. 7 and 8 are both a little more difficult, but you're still leaving some reps in the tank. Common traits of a 7 and 8, you would probably start breaking a sweat, feel some sort of muscle pump, and feel like you're working out, but you're definitely not going to a failure, and you should not feel dead when you're done doing a 7 or 8. An example of this is, if you can lift 100 pounds over your head 10 times, doing it between 6 to 7 reps would probably leave you at a 7 or 8. Now I'm going to skip 9 and jump to 10 to help you better understand what 9 is. So 10 is absolute muscular failure, which means even if you wanted to push harder, you cannot push any harder. If you can lift 100 pounds over your head 10 times, a 10 means you completed a full 10 reps. There is no chance in hell that you can push for an 11th rep. Understanding this will help you understand what a 9 is. A 9 is just slightly below a 10. It's the most strenuous physical activity you can possibly do that is not muscle failure, which means you are leaving about half a rep to 1 full rep in the tank. So if you can press 100 pounds over your head 10 times, a 9 would probably be doing 9 reps or 9.5 reps or 9 reps with a really slow eccentric at the end of the 9th rep. Now that you understand these two terms, I'm going to explain how they relate to your program. The main difference between intensity and rated perceived exertion is that intensity is based off of your 1 rep max, and a 1 rep max isn't tested very often. In fact, the more experienced lifter you are, the more infrequent you will be testing your 1 rep max, which means that the numbers in your program that are based off of a 1 rep max don't take into account the fact that you may have been sleep deprived for 3 days, haven't been able to get proper nutrition, maybe have family stress and work stress involved. In other words, it doesn't take into account the changes that happen day to day. The numbers are based off of a 1 rep max that you may have hit a month ago, 2 months ago, or even 6 months ago. RPE, rated perceived exertion, on the other hand, is very day to day. It's how much effort, how much exertion you feel like you are giving in that given day. What may feel like a 9 on one day may feel like a 6 on another day, which makes RPE very day-to-day kind of programming. Now, just as anything in this world, each one has a pro and a con. Everything has a bright side and a dark side. RPE programming is very useful for novice lifters since their max and their strength changes so rapidly. If you are brand new to lifting and you were able to bench 135, chances are that 2 weeks later you'll probably be able to bench 185. Now for me as a trainer, it would be very irresponsible to ask a novice lifter to test their 1 rep max, especially if I'm not around. So to get around this, you can just use RPE for the programming. In other words, you can have, let's say for example, week 1 work at an RPE of 6, week 2 and 3 work at 7 and 8, and week 4 maybe go 9, and the last day go 10. You can also do individual set RP. You can have the first set at a 6, the second set at an 8, and the last set till failure, which would be a 10. The pros of programming according to intensity are that it leaves you accountable. If you know that on Monday you have to hit 3 sets of 5 with 315, and on Thursday you have to hit 3 sets of 6 with 315, it doesn't leave much room for excuses. You know what has to get done, you go in the gym, you do it, and then you leave. Kind of like a shopping list at a grocery store. When you're working off RP, it leaves a lot more room for excuses. If you're lazy that day, you can be like, oh, everything felt heavy, and that leaves you room to not complete everything you were supposed to do just because you were outright lazy and felt like everything was heavy today. So to sum this up, I would like to conclude that I thoroughly believe that RPE programming is very useful for novice lifters. Since you rarely know their maximum strength values, and because their strength changes so rapidly, it's hard to base the program off of intensity. On the other hand, I thoroughly believe that intensity programming is very useful for experienced lifters, since most experienced lifters know their maximum strength values, and because their strength doesn't change as rapidly, it's much easier to base their program off of an intensity than off of an RPE. Now, there is also a way that these two methods can be used simultaneously together. For example, if you take your main list of the program, let's say your program starts off with a bench press and a deadlift, okay? These two numbers, you know your maximum strength values. You know, for example, let's say you can bench press 225 and deadlift 315. You can work off of these percentages. And then you can use RPE for your accessory work. For example, let's say you're gonna finish off your workout with some high rep back squats, some dips, and some pull-ups. You can say that the first set you'll do an RPE of 7, the second set you'll do an RPE of 8, and the last set you'll do an RPE of 10. Or if you do 4 sets, maybe 7, 8, 9, 10. This is very useful because you don't know how much the main exercises of the program will take out of you on any given day. It could be that on one day the deadlifts will completely fatigue you and doing 2 pull-ups will feel like an 8, and it could be that on another day the deadlifts won't fatigue you at all and you can do 10 pull-ups and feel like a 6. So I personally am a very big advocate of mixing the intensity for the main lifts and then using the RPE chart for the accessory lifts, since they're more variable and they don't need to be based off of a 1 rep max. There's just one more thing that I'd like to conclude with. That training at an intensity will usually determine your rep range. For example, if you're training at 85%, the chances of you doing more than 6 reps is highly unlikely. Of course, this will largely depend on your individual fiber distribution and your training history, but it is all within a certain rep range. On the other hand, training at an RPE leaves the rep range completely open to choice. For example, if I say work at an RPE of 8, you can use 20 pounds and do 30 reps. You can probably use 30 pounds and maybe do 15 reps, do 40 pounds and do 8 reps, and maybe use 45 pounds and do 2 reps. And they will all be at the same RPE. The problem is that on each of these rep ranges, you may be using different energy systems, different muscle fibers, and training different neural patterns in your body. So to compensate for this room of uncertainty, usually an RPE should also be given with the rep range. For example, if I say complete a set at an RPE of 8 between 10 to 12 reps, you know that if for you to get to an RPE of 8 you had to complete 15 reps, you have to increase the load a little bit. On the other hand, if for you to reach an RPE of 8 you were only able to complete 6 reps, you know that you have to decrease the load a little bit. This will allow you to train at the exertion levels that I want you to, and in the exact rep range and energy system that I'd like you to as well. As always, I hope that I broke these concepts down so that they'll be very easy to understand. Of course, if you have any questions, feel free to comment below or email me directly. I'll be more than happy to help.